smell of rot comes first, not the clean rot of autumn leaves or turned earth. This is something else, something wet and wrong, the kind of smell that makes a man's stomach turn, even when he has spent 3 years cutting into bodies on operating tables from Normandy to the Rhineland. Captain Everett Caldwell stands in the doorway of the prisoner ward at Camp Swift, Texas, and that smell hits him like a fist. It is August 1945. The war in Europe has been over for 3 months. The war in the Pacific will end in 6 days, though no one in this converted warehouse knows that yet. What Caldwell knows right now, standing in air so thick with heat, it feels like breathing through wet cloth, is that someone in this room is dying. The ward holds 47 prisoners of war, 46 men and 1 girl. The men are Germans mostly, a few Italians. They sit on metal cots arranged in rows that stretch into the shadows of the warehouse. Some play cards, some sleep, some stare at nothing with the particular emptiness that comes after a man has lost a war. The girl sits alone on a cot near the far wall. She is small. That is what Caldwell notices first. Small in the way that children are small, though she is not a child. The intake form says 19 years old, but she looks younger. The torn grey-blue uniform hangs on her like clothes borrowed from someone else's life. Her hair, cut short in the practical style of women who worked in factories or gun crews, sticks to her forehead in dark, wet lines. And her left arm, wrapped in strips of fabric that might once have been white, rests across her lap like something dead. Lieutenant Margot Kensington, the surgical nurse who called Caldwell to the ward, stands beside him. She is from Massachusetts, a woman in her early 30s with capable hands and eyes that have seen enough suffering to recognize it at a distance. She does not speak. She just looks at the girl and then at Caldwell. And in that look is a question that does not need words. How bad Caldwell crosses the ward. His boots echo on concrete. The temperature inside the warehouse is over 100 degrees. There is no air conditioning at Camp Swift, just fans that push hot air in slow circles and do nothing to cut the smell. The girl watches him approach. Her eyes are grey or maybe blue. It is hard to tell in this light. What is clear is the fear in them. Not the fear of pain exactly, something deeper than that. The fear of a person who has been taught that the men in American uniforms are monsters. Caldwell has seen that look before on the faces of children in French villages, on the faces of soldiers too young to shave lying in the mud with holes in their bodies. It is the look of someone who has been told lies for so long that truth feels like another kind of trap. He stops, 2 feet from the cot, close enough to see, far enough to give her space. "My name is Captain Caldwell," he says, in slow, clear English. "I'm a doctor. I need to look at your arm." The girl does not move. Her lips part, and when she speaks, her voice is barely louder than the sound of the fans. "Bitte nicht schneiden." Please do not cut. Caldwell looks at Kensington. The nurse's German is better than his. She takes a half step forward and speaks in the girl's language, low and steady, translating what Caldwell has said and adding something else. Reassurance, maybe. Or just the sound of a human voice that does not carry the weight of command. The girl's shoulders drop an inch, not relaxation, just exhaustion too deep to fight anymore. "Her name is Lieselotte Hartmann," Kensington says. "She goes by Lisa. She was captured 6 weeks ago in France. Luftwaffe auxiliary radio operator." Caldwell nods. He has treated auxiliary girls before. The Germans started using them in 1943 when the men ran out. 16, 17, 18 years old, sent to man anti-aircraft guns and communication lines because there was no one else left to send. "Ask her when she was wounded." "Mo?" Kensington asks. The girl answers in German. 3 sentences, maybe 4. Her voice cracks on the last word. She says, "It happened on the transport ship," Kensington translates. 6 weeks ago, a storm in the Atlantic. She fell down a ladder in the hold. A nail went through her forearm. Another girl bandaged it. 6 weeks. Caldwell feels something cold settle in his chest. 6 weeks is a long time for a wound to go untreated. long enough for infection to set in, long enough for that infection to spread from tissue into blood. Ask her why she didn't report it when she arrived at camp, Kensington asks. The girl's answer is shorter this time, just 2 words. She was afraid, Kensington says. Afraid they would separate her from her friend if she went to the infirmary. Caldwell looks at the girl, at the way she holds her arm like something fragile, at the sweat on her face that has nothing to do with the heat. I need to see it, he says. Kensington translates. The girl hesitates. Then, moving with the careful slowness of someone trying not to disturb a wound, she lifts her left arm and extends it toward Caldwell. He pulls a metal stool close and sits. The girl flinches when he reaches for her arm, but she does not pull away. The bandages are makeshift, strips of torn cloth wrapped around her forearm from wrist to elbow. The outer layer looks like it was once part of a cotton undershirt. Beneath that, more fabric, darker and stiff with dried blood and something else. Pus, maybe, or the yellow fluid that seeps from wounds when tissue starts to die. Caldwell reaches for the scissors on his belt. The girl sees the glint of metal and her whole body goes rigid. It's okay, Kensington says in German. He's just cutting the bandage, not you. The girl nods, but her breathing has gone shallow and fast. Caldwell starts with the outer layer. The fabric comes away easily dry and brittle in the heat. The second layer is harder. It has stuck to whatever lies beneath, and when he pulls gently, the girl gasps, and her right hand grips the edge of the cot so hard her knuckles go white. He works slowly, cutting when he can, pulling when he must. The third layer is gauze brown and yellow with old blood. The fourth is more cotton soaked through and reeking of something sweet and rotten. When the last piece comes free, Caldwell sets the scissors down and just looks. The wound runs from the girl's wrist to halfway up her forearm. It is a puncture deep and ragged, the kind of injury that happens when a piece of metal punches through flesh and carries dirt and rust and whatever else was on that nail into the body. But the wound itself is not the problem. The problem is what has grown inside it. The skin around the puncture is swollen tight and shiny like a balloon filled too full. The edges of the wound are black, the tissue there already dead. And running up from the wound in thin red lines like the veins on a leaf are streaks of inflammation that disappear beneath the sleeve of her uniform. Lymphangitis, blood poisoning. Caldwell has seen it before. On soldiers who stepped on rusty wire in the trenches, on civilians caught in bombing raids, their wounds packed with debris. It is treatable if caught early. But 6 weeks is not early. 6 weeks is the edge of something that cannot be walked back. He touches the skin near the wound, and it is hot. Hotter than the air. Hotter than fever, the kind of heat that comes from a body trying to fight an infection it cannot win. The girl is watching him. He can feel her eyes wide and unblinking, waiting for him to say something, anything. He looks up and meets her gaze. "Your wound is infected," he says. Kensington translates her voice steady. "The infection is spreading. If we don't treat it immediately, you will lose the arm, maybe your life." The girl does not cry. She just stares at him, and in her eyes is something worse than fear. It is resignation. The look of a person who has already decided that this is how the story ends. "Will you cut it off?" she asks in broken English. Caldwell pauses. He could lie. Tell her it will be fine. But lies are not mercy, and this girl deserves better than false comfort. "Not if we move fast," he says. Then he stands, turns to Kensington and says 3 words that will change everything. "Get me penicillin." The infirmary at Camp Swift is not a hospital. It is a converted garage with concrete floors and steel tables and lights that hang from the ceiling on chains. There are 10 beds, most of them empty. A sink with a pump, shelves lined with bandages and sulfur powder and bottles of saline, and in a locked cabinet near the back wall a small supply of penicillin, the miracle drug that has saved more lives in this war than any weapon has taken. Caldwell scrubs his hands at the sink while Kensington prepares the instruments: a scalpel, forceps, irrigation solution, gauze pads, stacked in neat piles, and a leather strap folded twice the kind of thing a man might bite down on when there is no other way to manage pain. The girl sits on the examination table. She has not spoken since they brought her here. She just watches Caldwell with those wide grey-blue eyes, and in the set of her jaw is something that might be courage or might just be the absence of any other choice. "There is no general anesthesia available for prisoners of war," Caldwell says. Kensington translates, "But I have a local anesthetic, Novocaine. It will numb the area around the wound. You won't feel the cutting, just pressure." The girl nods. "This will take time," Caldwell continues. "Maybe an hour. I need to remove all the dead tissue, clean out the infection. If I don't, it will keep spreading. Do you understand?" Another nod. "It's going to hurt," he says. "Not a question, a fact. But you're going to keep your arm." And for the first time since she sat down, something shifts in the girl's face. Not hope exactly, but maybe the faint outline of it. The possibility that there is a world on the other side of this table where she still has two hands to hold things with. Caldwell picks up the syringe. The Novocaine is clear, and when he taps the barrel to release air bubbles, a single drop runs down the needle and falls to the floor. "Ready?" he asks. The girl looks at Kensington. The nurse places a hand on her shoulder, not restraining, just grounding. A reminder that she is not alone in this room. "Ja," the girl whispers. "Yes." Caldwell injects the anesthetic in 6 places around the wound. The girl flinches with each needle stick, but she does not pull away. After the last injection, he waits. 2 minutes. 3. Testing the skin with the tip of the forceps to see if the numbness has set in. When he is sure she cannot feel it, he picks up the scalpel. The first cut is shallow, just trimming the black necrotic tissue at the edges of the wound. The dead skin peels away in strips, and beneath it is the angry red of living flesh. Blood wells up slow and dark, which is a good sign. It means the tissue underneath is still alive, still fighting. But the deeper he goes, the worse it gets. There are pockets of infection buried in the muscle, places where bacteria have tunneled in and created abscesses, small lakes of pus trapped beneath layers of tissue. Caldwell has to open each one, drain it, scrape out the dead material with the edge of the scalpel. Every time he does, the girl jerks. Her whole body goes stiff, and her right hand grips the edge of the table with a force that makes the metal creak. She is not screaming, she is not even crying. But her breathing has gone ragged, and the muscles in her neck stand out like cables under skin. Kensington keeps one hand on the girl's shoulder. With the other, she wipes sweat from her forehead. "You're doing so well," Kensington says in German. "Just a little more. You're almost there." It is a lie. They are not almost there. They are maybe halfway through, and the worst part is still to come. But the girl nods anyway, and Caldwell knows that she knows it is a lie and that she is choosing to believe it because the alternative is to fall apart right here on this table. He works for 40 minutes, cutting, draining, scraping. By the time he finishes, his hands are slick with blood and pus, and the wound looks worse than it did when he started, raw and gaping, the muscle exposed in thin, white lines between the red, but it is clean, no more pus, no more black tissue. Just the honest damage of a puncture wound that has been stripped down to its bones. Caldwell flushes the wound with saline. The girl does not flinch. She has gone somewhere else now, somewhere inside herself where pain is just noise and noise can be ignored. He packs the wound with sulfur powder, the yellow dust turning to paste when it mixes with blood. Then he layers on gauze, wrapping the arm from wrist to elbow in tight, clean spirals of white. When he ties off the last bandage, he steps back and looks at the girl. Her face is pale. Her lips are white. There are tear tracks on her cheeks, though he did not see her cry. "It's done," he says. "The worst part is over." Kensington translates. The girl does not respond. She just stares at her bandaged arm, turning it slowly in the light, as if she cannot quite believe it is still attached to her body. "You did it," Kensington says softly. "You were so brave." The girl looks up at her, and then in English, so broken it is barely recognizable, she says 4 words. Not brave, scared." Caldwell meets her eyes across the table. And in that moment, he understands something that he has always known but never quite put into words. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep going when fear is the only thing left. Fear is honest, he says. Brave people are always scared. Kensington translates. The girl's eyes fill with tears again, but this time she does not blink them away. She just lets them fall. They move her to a recovery cot in the prisoner ward, a section of the infirmary separated by a canvas curtain and guarded by a single military police officer who sits by the door with a rifle across his lap and eyes that see nothing because there is nothing here worth guarding. The girl lies on her back with her bandaged arm resting on her chest. She does not sleep. She just stares at the ceiling at the shadows cast by the overhead lights and breathes. Kensington checks on her every 2 hours, changing the bandages, checking for signs that the infection is coming back. For the first 12 hours, everything looks stable. The swelling has started to go down. The red streaks have faded to pink. The wound is healing the way clean wounds are supposed to heal. And then late that night, the girl develops a fever. It comes on fast. One moment she is lying quiet, her skin cool and dry. The next she is burning up her forehead, slick with sweat, her breathing shallow and quick. Kensington wakes Caldwell at midnight. He comes to the ward in his undershirt, his hair sticking up, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "How high?" he asks. 103, Kensington says, and rising. Caldwell pulls the bandages away from the girl's arm. They are clean, no new drainage, no pus. But when he touches the skin around the wound, it is warm again, not hot like before, but warmer than it should be. And the red streaks that had started to fade are back darker now, running up toward her elbow in thin, crimson lines. This is not the original infection, this is something new, something that got into her bloodstream during the procedure or was already there and is now spreading faster than the sulfur can stop it. Caldwell has a decision to make. If the infection is in her blood, the only way to stop it is amputation. Cut off the arm, cut off the source, hope that the sepsis does not kill her anyway. But there is no guarantee that amputation will save her. And if he is wrong, he will have taken her arm for nothing. On the other hand, if he waits and the infection spreads, she will die within days, maybe hours. He looks at Kensington. "What do you think?" The nurse looks at the girl who is barely conscious, now her eyes open, but unfocused, her lips moving in whispered German that neither of them can understand. "If it were my arm," Kensington says quietly, "I'd want you to try everything else first." Caldwell nods. He starts an intravenous line, threading the needle into a vein in the girl's right arm. He hangs a bag of saline and lets it drip, slow and steady, flushing her system. He doubles the sulfur dosage, packing the wound again and giving her tablets dissolved in water. And then he does something that goes against every regulation in the military medical handbook. He opens the locked cabinet at the back of the infirmary and takes out a vial of penicillin. Penicillin is rationed. There is not enough of it to go around even for American soldiers. The standing order is that prisoners of war receive sulfur drugs only. Penicillin is reserved for cases where sulfur has failed and the patient is a U.S. serviceman. This girl is not a U.S. serviceman. She is a German prisoner, an enemy combatant. But Caldwell looks at her, lying on that cot, her skin burning, her body fighting a war it cannot win, and he does not see an enemy. He sees a patient. He fills the syringe. The penicillin is thick and cloudy, and when he injects it into her IV line, it moves through the tubing like milk mixing with water. Then he sits down in a chair beside her cot and waits. Kensington brings him coffee. It is bitter and lukewarm, but he drinks it anyway. "You could lose your commission for this," she says quietly. "I know," Caldwell says. "Was it worth it?" He looks at the girl, at the rise and fall of her chest, at the bandages wrapped around her arm, like a promise that has not yet been kept. "Ask me tomorrow," he says. For the next 6 hours, nothing changes. The fever stays high. The infection stays active. The girl drifts in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words in German, sometimes crying, without sound, her face wet with tears she does not seem to know she is shedding. Caldwell checks her temperature every hour, 103, 104, 103.5. The numbers do not drop. And then just before dawn, when the sky outside the warehouse is starting to turn from black to grey, something shifts. The girl's fever breaks. Her temperature drops 2 degrees in an hour. By the time the sun comes up, painting the walls of the ward in thin gold light, she is awake. Her eyes are clear. Her skin is cool. Caldwell unwraps the bandages and the wound looks better. The redness has stopped spreading. The skin feels cooler to the touch. The infection has not disappeared, but it has stopped advancing. The girl is going to keep her arm. When he tells her, she does not smile. She does not thank him. She just closes her eyes and whispers 2 words. Ich lebe. I live. Kensington translates, though Caldwell does not need the translation. He has heard those words before in a dozen languages from 100 patients who did not believe they would survive long enough to say them. He nods. Yes, he says. You live. The girl opens her eyes and looks at him. Really looks at him, for the first time since he cut into her arm. And in her gaze is something that Caldwell has not seen before. Not gratitude exactly, but maybe the beginning of it, or maybe just the slow, painful realization that the world is not what she was told it would be, that the men in American uniforms are not monsters, that kindness is possible even here, even now, even between people who were supposed to be enemies. She says something in German. Kensington translates. She wants to know why you did this. Caldwell looks at the girl, at the bandages on her arm, at the sweat drying on her forehead, and the exhaustion in her eyes. Because you're not my enemy, he says. You're my patient. That's the only thing that matters in this room. Kensington translates. The girl does not respond, but something in her face changes, not relief, not joy, just a kind of quiet collapse, the way a person looks when they have been carrying something heavy for too long, and finally they are allowed to put it down. She turns her head to the side and closes her eyes. Within minutes, she is asleep. Caldwell stands and walks to the door. Kensington follows. They step outside into the Texas morning, into air that is already warm and will be brutal by noon. What happens to her now? Kensington asks. She recovers, Caldwell says. Then she goes back to the prisoner barracks. And when the war ends, she goes home, if there's a home left to go to. And if there isn't, Caldwell does not answer. He just looks out across the camp at the rows of barracks and the guard towers and the wire fences that stretch into the distance, and he thinks about all the people in this world who have lost their homes and their families and their futures, and he wonders if saving one girl's arm makes any difference at all. But then he thinks about the way she looked at him, the way she said, I live. And he decides that maybe it does. Maybe it is enough to save one person. To look at one wound and decide to treat it. To see one life and decide it is worth fighting for, even if that life belongs to the enemy, especially if that life belongs to the enemy. Because if there is any hope at all in this broken world, it starts with small things, with clean bandages and penicillin, and the decision to see a patient instead of a uniform. Caldwell turns and walks back into the infirmary. There is work to do. There is always work to do. The morning after the fever breaks, Lieutenant Margot Kensington brings breakfast. Lisa is awake when the nurse pushes through the canvas curtain. Awake but not moving, just lying on her back with her bandaged arm across her chest, staring at the metal ceiling of the warehouse as if she might find answers written there in rust and shadow. Kensington sets a tray on the small table beside the cot. The sound of metal on metal makes Lisa turn her head, and that is when the smell hits her. Salt, smoke, something sweet, like caramelized sugar but deeper than that. Richer, it cuts through the antiseptic smell of the ward like a knife through cloth, sharp and impossible to ignore. Lisa sits up slowly, favoring her left arm. Her eyes go to the tray. 6 strips of bacon glistening with fat, the edges dark and crispy. 2 fried eggs, the yolks bright yellow like the Texas sun she saw through the warehouse windows yesterday morning. A slice of white bread toasted butter melting into the grain, and a tin cup of coffee, black steam rising in thin spirals. She stares at it. She has not seen food like this since before the war. Maybe not even then. In Germany by 1943 there was no bacon, no butter, no white bread. There was black bread made from sawdust and potato peels. There was turnip soup so thin you could see through it. There was hunger that sat in your stomach like a stone and never left. And here on a tray, in a prison camp in Texas, is more food than her mother would have seen in a month. "Eat," Kensington says in German. "You need your strength." Lisa does not move. She just keeps staring at the bacon, at the way the fat has pooled around the edges, at the way the light catches on the surface like oil on water. She starts, but the word dies in her throat. Kensington sits down on the edge of the cot. Her voice is gentle. "What's wrong?" Lisa shakes her head. She does not have the words, not in German, not in English, not in any language, but her hand moves almost without her permission, and she picks up one strip of bacon. It is still warm. The heat of it seeps through her fingers. She brings it close to her face and breathes in, and the smell is so strong it makes her eyes water. Salt and smoke and meat and something else, something primal that her body recognizes, even if her mind does not. She takes a bite. The crispy edge shatters between her teeth, and for a second there is texture and nothing else. Then the fat melts. It coats her tongue, her teeth, the inside of her cheeks. It slides down her throat like warm silk. The taste hits a moment later, salt first, sharp and clean, then the richness of the fat, heavy and almost sweet. And underneath that, a subtle char, the flavor of meat that has been cooked until the sugars caramelize and the edges burn just enough to add depth without bitterness. For 30 seconds there is no war, no Germany, no dead friends, no mother on the other side of the ocean eating bark stripped from trees in the ruins of Hamburg. There is just bacon. And then the guilt comes. It rises up from somewhere deep in her chest, sudden and overwhelming like a wave that has been building for weeks and finally crashes. She sees her mother's face, thin, grey, the skin pulled tight over bones that should not be visible. She sees her mother's hands cracked and bleeding from cold and work, and not enough food. She sees her mother eating soup made from grass, from weeds pulled out of bomb craters, from anything that might have calories enough to keep a body alive one more day. And here she is, Lieselotte Hartmann, 19 years old, sitting in an American prison camp eating bacon. The second bite turns to ash in her mouth. She puts the strip down. Her hand is shaking. She picks up the fork, spears one of the eggs, and watches as the yolk breaks and runs across the plate in a river of gold. "Was ist Mutti?" she whispers. "What is my mother eating?" The question is not for Kensington, it is not for anyone. It is just a sound that escapes unbidden from a place inside her that she thought she had locked away, but Kensington hears it anyway. "What did you say?" the nurse asks. Lisa looks up. There are tears on her face now, though she does not remember starting to cry. "My mother," she says in broken English, in Germany, she eating Baumrinde, tree bark, and I..." She gestures helplessly at the plate. "I eat bacon." The words hang in the air between them. Kensington does not tell her it is okay. She does not say that she deserves this food or that she should not feel guilty. She is smart enough to know that those words would be lies, and lies are not what this girl needs. Instead, she says, "The war did this to you, to her, not you." Lisa shakes her head. "No, I am here, safe, fed. She is there, starving. I am schlechte Tochter, bad daughter." "You're a survivor," Kensington says quietly. That's not the same thing. But Lisa is not listening anymore. She is looking at the plate, at the bacon and eggs and toast, and she is thinking about all the propaganda she was fed, all the lies. The Americans are monsters, they said. They will torture you, rape you, kill you. And here she is in an American camp, and they have given her bacon. The dissonance is almost too much to bear. She pushes the plate away. "I cannot," she says, "I cannot eat this." Kensington looks at her for a long moment. Then she picks up the fork, spears a piece of egg, and holds it out. "One bite," she says, "for your mother, so you can heal, so you can go home and tell her you survived." Lisa stares at the fork, at the egg, golden and perfect, at this woman, this enemy, who is trying to feed her with the tenderness of a sister. Slowly, she opens her mouth. The egg is soft and rich and tastes like nothing she has ever known. It tastes like abundance, like a world where there is enough. And it tastes like betrayal. She swallows. And then she starts to cry in earnest, her shoulders shaking, her good hand covering her face, the sobs coming in great heaving gasps that she cannot control. Kensington sets the fork down and puts a hand on Lisa's shoulder. She does not speak. She just sits there, a steady presence, while the girl falls apart. Outside, the sun climbs higher. The heat builds. The war goes on. And in a prisoner ward in Texas, a 19-year-old German girl learns that kindness can be crueler than hate. 3 days pass. The infection does not come back. The wound begins to heal from the inside out the way clean wounds are supposed to heal. The red streaks fade. The swelling goes down. Lisa's fever stays gone. Caldwell checks on her twice a day. He does not say much, just unwraps the bandages, examines the wound, nods in satisfaction and wraps it again. But Lisa watches him. She watches the way his hands move, efficient and sure. She watches the way he looks at her arm, not with disgust or pity, but with the clinical detachment of a craftsman evaluating his work. She watches, and she thinks. In Germany, they told her that Americans were soft, decadent. They had machines and money and no real understanding of sacrifice. But this man, this Captain Caldwell, he stayed awake all night to keep her alive. He used medicine that was probably meant for his own soldiers. He did it without hesitation, without expecting thanks. She does not understand it, or maybe she understands it too well, and that is what frightens her. On the 4th day, Kensington brings a radio into the ward. It is a small thing, battered and old, the kind that sits on a shelf and pulls in stations from hundreds of miles away if the weather is right. She sets it on a table near the entrance, turns the dial until she finds a clear signal and leaves it on. At first, no one pays attention. The prisoners are used to silence. They have learned to live inside their own heads, to shut out the world beyond the wire fences and the guard towers. But then on the morning of August 6th, the broadcast changes. A voice cuts through the static, urgent, clipped, the tone of a man reading news that he does not quite believe. This morning at approximately 8:15 local time, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The ward goes quiet. Early reports estimate total destruction of the city, casualties in the tens of thousands. President Truman has issued a statement calling for Japan's immediate surrender. Lisa does not understand all the words. Her English is still broken, still limited to the phrases she has learned from Kensington and the guards. But she understands enough. Bomb, city, destruction. She looks at the other prisoners. Some of them are listening, some are not. The German Corporal Kessler sits on his cot with his arms crossed and his face like stone. He does not react, does not blink. But Lisa sees the way his jaw tightens, the way his hands curl into fists. New weapon, someone mutters in German. They used a new weapon. Atomic, another voice says. What does that mean? No one answers. 3 days later, the radio crackles again. Another city, Nagasaki, another bomb, and then on August 15th, the announcement that changes everything. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. The ward erupts. Not with cheers, but with something quieter, a release of tension that has been building for years. Men stand, they shake hands, they clap each other on the back. Some pray, some cry. Lisa sits on her cot and feels nothing. The war is over. Germany lost. Japan lost. All the death, all the sacrifice, all the propaganda about the glorious future they were building, all of it for nothing. She thinks about her mother. About the letters she sent in the spring before the capture, letters that talked about rations getting smaller, about Allied bombers over Hamburg every night, about neighbors disappearing into the rubble. She thinks about the lies. They said Germany was winning. They said the Allies were weak, divided, on the verge of collapse. They said that if they just held on a little longer, victory would come. But there is no victory. There is only surrender. And now her mother is somewhere in the ruins of that surrender. And Lisa is here in Texas, eating food that her mother will never taste. That night she lies awake and stares at the ceiling. She thinks about the bacon, about the way it melted on her tongue, about the guilt that came with it. She thinks about Caldwell, about the way he said, "You're not my enemy, you're my patient." She thinks about propaganda and truth and the distance between them, and she wonders for the first time who the real enemy was. The months pass. Summer turns to autumn. The heat breaks. The air in the warehouse cools enough that the prisoners no longer wake up soaked in sweat. Lisa's arm heals. The scar is thick and pink, running from her wrist to the middle of her forearm like a seam where someone tried to sew two pieces of her back together. It will never fade completely. Caldwell tells her this and she nods. She does not care. She has her arm. She can move her fingers. She can make a fist. That is enough. In October, she receives her first letter from Germany. It comes through the Red Cross, forwarded from camp to camp, until it finally reaches Texas. The envelope is thin and dirty, the address barely legible. Inside is a single sheet of paper. The handwriting is shaky, the ink smudged. Lieselotte, it begins. I am writing to tell you that your mother passed away on September 12th. Lisa reads the letter 3 times before the words make sense. Her mother is dead. She died of malnutrition and pneumonia in a refugee hospital in Hamburg. She died surrounded by strangers. She died without knowing if her daughter was alive. Lisa folds the letter carefully and puts it under her pillow. She does not cry. She does not scream. She just sits on her cot and stares at the wall until Kensington comes to check on her. Are you all right? The nurse asks. Lisa looks at her. My mother is dead. Kensington's face goes soft with sympathy. I'm so sorry. She died in September, Lisa says. Her voice is flat, empty. I was eating bacon in August. She says it like a confession, like a crime. Kensington sits down beside her. Lisa, I ate bacon while she starved. I ate eggs. I drank coffee. And she died. That's not your fault. Whose fault is it? Lisa asks. The war god, who do I blame? Kensington does not answer, because there is no answer. There is just the fact of it. A woman died hungry, while her daughter was fed by the enemy. That night, Lisa does not sleep. She lies on her cot and thinks about her mother's last days, about the hunger, the cold, the fear. And she thinks about the bacon. Christmas comes. The camp administration decides to organize a holiday meal for the prisoners, a gesture of goodwill they call it, a way to show that even in captivity there is humanity. The tables are set up in the mess hall, long and covered with white sheets. There are decorations, cheap and sparse, but decorations nonetheless. Paper snowflakes cut by the guards' children, a small pine tree in the corner hung with strings of popcorn, and the food, turkey roasted until the skin crackles, mashed potatoes, white and fluffy, swimming in butter, cranberry sauce, tart and sweet, green beans, dinner rolls, pumpkin pie. It is more food than most of the prisoners have seen in years. Lise sits at the table and stares at her plate. The turkey is golden brown, the skin glistening with fat. She can see the grain of the meat where it has been carved, the white of the breast meat falling apart in tender layers. The potatoes are piled high, a pat of butter melting on top, the steam rising in lazy curls. She picks up her fork. The turkey skin crackles between her teeth, brittle and perfect. Then the meat soft and rich, dissolving on her tongue. The gravy thick and salty, coating everything. It is the best thing she has ever tasted. and it is unbearable. She takes 3 bites, 4, 5, and then she stands her chair scraping loud against the floor and walks out of the mess hall. Kensington finds her 10 minutes later sitting on the ground outside the barracks, her back against the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest. Lisa, the girl does not look up. Her face is wet with tears. "What happened?" Kensington asks, crouching down beside her. "I cannot," Lise says. Her voice is raw. "I cannot eat that food." "Why not?" "Because my mother is dead." The words come out in a shout, sudden and violent. "She died in September, hungry, and I am here eating turkey like it is Weihnachten, like it is a celebration." She looks at Kensington and her eyes are wild with grief and rage and guilt all tangled together. "Why I live?" she asks. "Why God save me and not her? Why American feed me and German let her die? Who is enemy? Who?" Kensington does not have an answer. She just sits down beside Lisa on the cold ground and lets the girl cry. After a long time, Lisa speaks again. Her voice is quieter now, exhausted. "In Germany, they tell us Americans are monsters. No soul, no heart. They kill for sport." She looks at her bandaged arm, at the scar she knows is underneath. "But Americans save my arm, give me food, treat me like I am human," she shakes her head. "And Germans let my mother starve. So who is monster?" The question hangs in the air. Kensington reaches out and takes Lisa's hand. "Sometimes," she says slowly, "there are no monsters, just people, and war makes people do terrible things. It makes them into something they're not." "Then who do I hate?" Lisa asks. "If there is no monster, who do I blame for my mother?" The war," Kensington says. "Well, blame the war, not yourself. Not your mother, not the people trying to keep you alive." Lisa is quiet for a long time. Then she says, very softly, "I do not know how to do that." "None of us do," Kensington says. They sit together in the darkness, 2 women on opposite sides of a war that has ended but left its scars nonetheless, and they do not speak. Inside the mess hall, the other prisoners are finishing their Christmas dinner. Outside, the Texas sky stretches wide and cold and full of stars. And Lieselotte Hartmann, 19 years old, survivor of a war she did not choose, learns that sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. The months between Christmas and the end blur together. Winter turns to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn again. Lisa works in the camp kitchen now, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, simple work that keeps her hands busy and her mind quiet. The scar on her arm has faded from pink to pale white, but it still aches when rain is coming. A permanent barometer, a reminder written in tissue and nerve. She sees Caldwell occasionally. He nods when they pass in the corridor between the ward and the supply room. She nods back. There is nothing left to say between them. Everything that mattered was said in the 40 minutes on the operating table and in the 3 words he spoke after, "You're my patient." In March of 1946, Kensington finds Lisa in the kitchen and pulls her aside. "Your friend," the nurse says in German. "Annalisa Vogel, she's been transferred." Lisa's hands go still in the dishwater. "Where Oklahoma, a camp near Alva. They're consolidating the women prisoners before repatriation." "When did she leave?" "This morning." Lisa nods slowly. She did not get to say goodbye. Did not get to tell Anne that the bandage she made from her undershirt saved Lisa's life, that the infection would have killed her in days if Anne had not wrapped the wound, if Anne had not kept her moving when all Lisa wanted to do was lie down and die. That night she writes a letter, short, careful with her words because she knows the censors will read it. "Dear Anne, the arm was saved. The American doctor fixed what you started. Thank you for not letting me quit. I hope you make it home. I hope we both do. Your friend Lisa." She gives the letter to Kensington to mail. She never receives a reply. She does not know if the letter was delivered. She does not know if Anne made it home. She does not know if Anne is alive. There are 1,000 things she does not know, and that number grows every day. In August, on the anniversary of her surgery, Lisa walks to the infirmary. She does not plan it. Her feet just carry her there, as if her body remembers something her mind has tried to forget. Caldwell is inside organizing supplies, counting bandages, making notes on a clipboard. He looks up when she enters, and there is a moment of confusion before recognition settles on his face. "Lisa," he says. It is the first time he has used her name in months. "Doctor," she replies. "How is the arm?" She holds it up, flexes her fingers, makes a fist. The movement is slower than her right hand, and there is a slight tremor she cannot control, but the fingers work. The arm works. "It works," she says in English. "Good." They stand in silence. The infirmary is hot. The fans push air in slow circles. Outside, someone is shouting in German. A game of cards, probably. An argument over rules. "I wanted to say thank you," Lise says. Again. Caldwell shakes his head. "You already did. You don't need to keep doing it." "I know, but I wanted to anyway." He looks at her, really looks at her. And she wonders what he sees. A girl who was dying, and now is not. A prisoner who will go home to ruins. A person who learned too late that the enemy was human. "What will you do?" he asks. "When you go home?" "I do not know," she says honestly. "Find what is left. Start again." "That's all any of us can do," she nods. Then she turns and walks out, and she does not visit the infirmary again. In November, the announcement comes over the camp loudspeaker. Repatriation will begin in December. German prisoners will be sent home in waves, women first, then officers, then enlisted men. Lisa has 6 weeks to prepare for a return to a country she no longer recognizes. She thinks about her mother's grave in a refugee cemetery somewhere in Hamburg, about the house on Eppendorfer Weg that is probably rubble, about streets she walked as a child that are now just names on a map of destruction. And she thinks about the words she has been carrying in her head for months, the letter she needs to write before she leaves this place. Not just thank you, something more than that, something true. December 1946. The winter comes hard to Camp Swift, not the brutal cold of a northern winter, but the Texas version, wet and raw, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. The warehouse that serves as the prisoner ward is unheated, except for a single pot-bellied stove in the corner that does more to fill the air with smoke than warmth. Lisa sits on her cot with a pencil and a piece of paper. She has been sitting here for 2 hours, staring at the blank page. The pencil feels strange in her hand. Too light, too small. She has not written anything longer than her name since before the war. But there are words inside her that need to come out. Words that have been building for months, pressing against the inside of her chest, like something alive trying to escape. She looks down at her left arm. The bandages are gone now. Have been for over a year. What remains is the scar, thick and permanent, running from her wrist to the middle of her forearm. In the cold it aches. A dull throb that reminds her every day of what was taken and what was saved. She flexes her fingers. They move. Not perfectly. The strength is not what it was. But they move. And that is enough. She touches the pencil to the paper. The first words come in German. They always do. English is still too foreign, too clumsy in her mouth. But she knows that Kensington will translate. The nurse has promised her that much. "Mein lieber Dr. Caldwell," she writes. "My dear Dr. Caldwell," she continues writing, slowly at first feeling her way through the words like someone walking through a dark room, then faster, the sentences spilling out in a rush. When she finishes, her hand is cramping and the paper is covered in careful, precise German script. She reads it over once, twice, then she folds it and walks to the infirmary. Kensington is cleaning instruments when Lisa walks in. The nurse looks up, sees the folded paper, and sets down the forceps she was sterilizing. "Is that for me?" she asks in German. Lisa shakes her head. "For the doctor, but I need you to translate, to make sure the words are right." Kensington wipes her hands on a towel and takes the paper. She unfolds it carefully and begins to read. Her lips move silently, shaping the German words. As she reads, something soft and sad moves across her face. When she finishes, she looks up. "You want to give this to him?" "Yes." "He'll appreciate it," Kensington says quietly, "but you know he doesn't expect thanks." "I know, but I need to say it anyway." Kensington nods. She pulls out a fresh sheet of paper and picks up a pen. For the next 20 minutes, she works on the translation, stopping occasionally to ask Lisa what she meant by a particular phrase. When she is done, there are 2 letters, one in German, one in English. Kensington reads the English version aloud. "My dear Dr. Caldwell, I do not know how to say thank you in English. You gave me a life I did not deserve. My mother died in September. I ate bacon in August. I ate turkey at Christmas. I am a bad daughter, but I understand now. The war was not your fault. It was not my fault. We are just people caught in a storm. You taught me something I will remember until I die. You said, 'You are not my enemy. You are my patient.'" Those words changed everything. "If I have children someday, I will teach them what you taught me. That kindness is stronger than hate. I learned this from a man I was told was my enemy. Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. I will never forget you. Lieselotte Hartmann." Silence fills the infirmary. Lisa's eyes are wet. She blinks and looks away. "Is it good?" she asks in broken English. "It's perfect," Kensington says. That afternoon, Kensington brings Caldwell to the ward. He comes in his uniform, his medical bag in one hand. He looks tired. He always looks tired these days. Lisa stands when she sees him. Her hands are shaking. Kensington has the English letter folded in her pocket. She pulls it out and hands it to Caldwell without explanation. He takes it, glances at Lisa, then unfolds the paper and begins to read. His face does not change as he reads. He has a doctor's face trained to neutrality. But when he reaches the end, he is very still. Then he folds the letter carefully and tucks it into his breast pocket. He looks at Lisa. "Thank you," he says. Then, in halting German, "Danke." Lisa nods. She holds up her left arm. The scar is visible, a pale line against her skin. "I keep it," she says in English, "because of you." Caldwell looks at the scar, at the clean line of it. Then he looks at her face. "You keep it because you fought. I just gave you the tools." He reaches out and shakes her hand. Her right hand. His grip is firm and brief, the handshake of equals. "Go home, Lisa," he says. "Build a good life." "I will try," she says. And then he is gone. That night Lisa cannot sleep. She lies on her cot and thinks about the letter, about Caldwell's face when he read it, about the way he shook her hand like she was a person, not a prisoner, and she thinks about what she did not put in the letter, the things she could not say because words are too small. She thinks about the moment when she understood that everything she had been taught was a lie, that the Americans were not monsters, that kindness was possible even between enemies, that the world was larger and stranger and more complicated than propaganda allowed. She gets out of bed quietly, pulls on her coat, walks to the infirmary. The building is dark, empty. She walks to the back corner where the wall meets the floor. There is a loose board there, a small gap where the concrete does not quite meet the wood. She pulls the German version of the letter from her pocket. The one Kensington translated. She should give it to Caldwell, should let him read it in both languages, but she is afraid that the censors will see it as fraternizing, afraid that it will cause trouble for a man who broke regulations to save her life. So instead she folds the letter small and tight, and she slides it into the gap behind the loose board. If it is found, it is found. If not, then maybe someday, years from now, someone will discover it and wonder about the German girl who hid a thank you note in the wall of an American camp. She presses the board back into place and stands. The letter is gone, hidden. A secret between her and the walls. She walks back to her cot and finally sleeps. Hamburg, Germany. February 1947. Lisa steps off the train into a city she does not recognize. The Hamburg of her childhood is gone. In its place is a landscape of broken stone and skeletal buildings, rubble piled in mountains along streets that no longer have names. The air smells like dust and ash and the ghost of fires that burned 2 years ago and never quite went out. She walks through the ruins with her small suitcase. The scar on her arm aches in the cold. She finds her mother's grave in a refugee cemetery on the outskirts of the city. A wooden cross, a name painted in black. Hartmann Elizabeth, 1899 to 1945. Lisa kneels in the frozen mud and places her hand on the earth. "I am sorry, Mutti," she whispers. "I am so sorry." She stays there until her knees go numb. Then she stands, brushes the dirt from her coat, and walks away. She has a life to build. Pennsylvania, March 1947. Everett Caldwell returns to civilian practice. He opens a small office outside Philadelphia. General surgery, hernias, broken bones, appendicitis. The work is mundane compared to the war, but it is honest. At night he sits in his office and thinks about the patients he saved and the ones he lost. And he thinks about the German girl. Lieselotte. Lisa. He wonders if she made it home. If she found her family. If she is alive. He takes the letter from his desk drawer and reads it again. He has memorized the words, but he reads it anyway. "You gave me a life I did not deserve." He thinks she is wrong. Everyone deserves a life. Even the enemy, especially the enemy. The years pass. Hamburg, 1952. Lisa marries Karl, a schoolteacher with a limp and a kind smile. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. She works as a nurse. She is good at her job, but she never speaks of the war. She wears long sleeves even in summer. When her children ask about the scar, she changes the subject. Pennsylvania, 1960. Caldwell's practice grows. He trains younger doctors. He publishes papers. He becomes known as a man who can save patients others have given up on. But at night, alone, he still wonders, did she make it home? Hamburg, 1985. Lisa retires. Her children are grown. Her husband is grey but still kind. One afternoon, her daughter finds her staring at her arm. "Mama, how did you get that scar?" Lisa looks at her daughter. "At this woman who has never known war. An American doctor saved my life," she says quietly. "During the war? An American—" "Yes. I was told they were monsters, but they were just people." She touches the scar. "He taught me that kindness is stronger than hate. I owe him everything, but I never told him." Pennsylvania, 1985. Caldwell writes his memoirs, not for publication, just for himself. He writes about the field hospitals, the blood, the endless broken bodies, and he writes about Lisa. "I saved her arm, but she saved something in me too. She reminded me that even in war we're all just people trying to go home. I hope she made it. I hope she knows she mattered." Hamburg, September 1998. Lieselotte Hartmann dies in her sleep at 72. Heart failure. Sudden but not unexpected. Her children clean out her apartment. In a drawer they find a journal. Old, yellowed. The daughter opens it and reads. Most entries are mundane. Shopping lists, recipes, notes about grandchildren. But on the last page, in shaky handwriting, I owe the American doctor a debt I can never repay. He gave me my life when he could have let me die. He taught me the world is not what they told us, that the enemy can be kind, that survival is not a sin. I hope wherever he is, he knows I lived well, that I tried to be worthy of the second chance he gave me. The daughter closes the journal and cries. Pennsylvania, March 1999. Everett Caldwell dies at 88, Alzheimer's. The end comes slowly then, all at once. In his final days, he asks his wife the same question. Did the German girl make it home? His wife does not know who he means. She holds his hand and says, yes, of course she made it home. He smiles, closes his eyes. Good, he whispers. That's good. Those are his last words. Pennsylvania, January 2024. The demolition crew arrives at the old Camp Swift site on a Tuesday morning. The camp has been abandoned for decades, the barracks gone. The fences rusted and fallen, only the infirmary remains a concrete shell with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. The city wants to build a memorial park, a reminder that even in conflict there was humanity. But first the infirmary must come down. The crew starts with sledgehammers, breaking walls, tearing up floors. One worker, a young man in his 20s, is pulling boards from the back corner when he sees something, paper, folded small. Wedged in the gap between floor and wall, he pulls it out carefully. The paper is brown with age, fragile, the edges crumbling. He unfolds it. The writing is in German. He cannot read it. But at the bottom, someone has written a translation in English. He reads it. Then he stops working and calls his supervisor. The letter makes its way through channels, Historical Society, Veterans Affairs, finally to the daughter of Everett Caldwell, now 83, living in a retirement home in Philadelphia. They bring her the letter on a Thursday afternoon. She reads it alone in her room, sitting by the window. When she finishes, she is crying. My father never knew, she whispers. He died wondering if she made it home, and she did. She made it home and lived and had children and never forgot him. She holds the letter to her chest. He saved her, and she saved him, and neither of them knew. Between 1942 and 1946, the United States held 370,000 German and Italian prisoners of war. They worked in fields and factories. They were fed and treated according to Geneva Conventions. The mortality rate in American custody was less than 1%. In German camps, Soviet prisoner mortality exceeded 50%. In Soviet camps, German mortality was nearly as high. These numbers matter. They represent choices. The choice to see prisoners as human, to treat wounds instead of ignoring them, to feed the starving even when they wore enemy uniforms. Everett Caldwell made that choice. So did thousands of others who decided compassion was not weakness. Because of those choices, people like Lieselotte Hartmann survived. She went home, built a life, raised children, and taught them that kindness is stronger than hate. That legacy is worth remembering, not because it was heroic, but because it was ordinary, because it was the default. Because the system, even in wartime, chose to save lives. That is the story. Not grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but small acts of decency repeated until they became a pattern, a culture, the difference between 1% mortality and 50%. Caldwell saved Lisa's arm with a scalpel and penicillin. But Lisa saved something in Caldwell too. She reminded him that even in war we are all just people trying to go home. Maybe that is enough. Maybe that is the only thing that matters. The letter was found 78 years after it was hidden. Both doctor and patient were dead, but the words remain. Kindness is stronger than hate. You are not my enemy. You are my patient. Words written by a 19-year-old German girl in a Texas prisoner of war camp in 1946. Words that are still true today. Words worth remembering.